Once upon a time, in the prosperous kingdom of Agbalu, there lived an extremely wealthy family. The Okanis were renowned for their vast estates and control over rare medicinal herbs that grew exclusively on their land. The herbs were prized for their healing properties, and their trade brought the Okanis immense fortune and influence. At the head of the family was Obasi, the eldest son, who had inherited the responsibility of overseeing the family business. His wife, Amara, was beautiful and intelligent, but her heart had grown cold over the years. Despite all their wealth and access to powerful remedies, Amara could not bear a child, a cruel twist of fate that pained her greatly. The sight of women in the household with their children filled her with so much bitterness, and over time, she became cruel, ruling the estate with an iron fist. One day, a new servant named Kanu was brought to the Okani mansion. Kanu was 20 years old, tall, quiet, and hardworking. He had been hired to tend the stables, care for the horses, and assist with the heavy labor around the estate. Unlike the other servants who gossiped and laughed together, Kanu kept to himself, preferring silence and hard work over idle conversation. Obasi quickly took notice of Kanu's dedication. He admired the young man's diligence and trusted him with more responsibilities around the estate. Over time, Obasi began to teach Kanu the care of the family's prized medicinal herbs, a task that required precision and knowledge. Kanu learned quickly, showing a surprising aptitude for the work. He was always calm, never seeking attention, and earned the respect of his fellow workers. Amara, however, paid little attention to Kanu. Her mind was consumed by her sorrow and frustration over her inability to have children. She ruled the household harshly. Her coldness affected everyone, and Kanu, like the other servants, learned to stay out of her way. Despite Kanu's quiet demeanor, Amara couldn't help but feel uneasy around him. There was no clear reason. He was a model servant, hardworking, respectful, but whenever she saw him working, a strange heaviness settled over her. Her mood would shift unpredictably, though she couldn't understand why. Some days, Amara found herself strangely drawn to him, while other days, his presence made her uncomfortable. Her heart would tighten with an inexplicable sense of guilt, though she could not pinpoint what caused it. This erratic behavior confused Kanu, but he kept his distance, preferring not to provoke Amara's anger. Occasionally, Amara would find herself staring out of the window, lost in thoughts, her fingers absently tracing the edge of an old crumpled letter she had kept hidden in her chambers, a letter addressed to a past she had buried long ago. Whenever she felt the weight of her regrets, she would quickly push the memories aside, unwilling to face them. She convinced herself that the past was irrelevant to her life now. What no one in the household knew was that Kanu's life had been filled with hardship long before he arrived at the Okani estate. He had been abandoned as a baby at the doorstep of an orphanage in a distant village, with no trace of his family. The only physical remnant of his past was a scar over his heart, the result of a burn he suffered as an infant, though he had no memory of how it happened. Kanu spent his childhood moving from one foster home to another. The families who took him in were often unkind, treating him as nothing more than cheap labor. He worked from a young age, helping with chores, tending fields, fetching water. He never went to school, never had a chance to play like the other children. These early hardships shaped Kanu into the quiet, resilient young man he had become, the one who relied only on himself. When he was old enough to leave the foster system, Kanu wandered from village to village, taking odd jobs to survive. It was during one of those jobs that an elderly man, a former servant of the Okanis, noticed Kanu's work ethic. Impressed by the young man's determination, the man recommended him for a position at the Okani estate, knowing the family always needed strong, reliable workers. Kanu saw the opportunity as a way out of his unstable life. Though he had heard rumors about the Okani household's strict mistress, he accepted the job, hoping for stability and a chance to build a better future. As the months passed, Amara's unease around Kanu only grew. She occasionally caught herself watching him from a distance, a strange sense of familiarity gnawing at her. Yet, each time she neared a realization, something interrupted her. A servant called her away, or Kanu disappeared from view before she could get a better look. Her anxiety deepened, though she pushed away the memories that resurfaced in her mind. Kanu also began to notice Amara's shifting moods towards him. He couldn't understand why she seemed to change between indifference and irritation. He continued to perform his duties diligently, but the growing tension between them left him feeling uneasy. One scorching afternoon, Kanu was working in the herb garden. The heat of the sun bore down on him, and he removed his shirt to cool off. Obasi happened to pass by and stopped to speak with him. As they talked, Obasi's eyes were drawn to a deep scar on Kanu's chest, an old burn that stretched across his heart. Later that evening, over dinner, he casually mentioned the unusual scar to Amara. The moment Amara heard about it, a wave of recognition crashed over her. The scar matched a memory she had buried deep within her past, and suddenly, everything made sense. Years before her marriage to Obasi, when Amara was just 18 years old, she had fallen in love with a traveling merchant. The affair had been passionate but brief, and when Amara found out she was pregnant, the merchant was long gone. Terrified of the shame and scandal it would bring, Amara fled to a distant village to give birth in secret. The baby boy was just a few weeks old when tragedy struck. One night, as Amara tried to soothe her son to sleep, a fire broke out in their small home. The infant was burned in the blaze, leaving a permanent scar over his heart. Overwhelmed by fear, shame, and the trauma of the accident, Amara felt she had no choice but to abandon her son at a nearby orphanage, believing she was too young and ill-equipped to care for him. She left him with nothing but the scar and returned back home, burying the memory of her child deep within her. Now, hearing about Kanu's scar, Amara realized the truth. The boy she had abandoned all those years was standing right in front of her. The next day, Amara went to the herb garden, where Kanu was working shirtless in the sun. She approached quietly, her heart pounding as she looked at the scar on his chest. The moment she saw it, her breath caught in her throat. It was the same scar, the mark she had seen on her infant son before abandoning him. Time seemed to stand still as the weight of the past came crashing on her. Without a word, Amara turned and hurried back into the mansion, knowing she could no longer keep the truth hidden. That evening, Amara confessed everything to Obasi: the affair, the secret pregnancy, and the abandonment of her son. Obasi was shocked and heartbroken. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. The betrayal cut deep, and the revelation that Kanu, the servant he had grown to respect, was actually Amara's son, shook him to his core. Together, they called Kanu into the mansion. As Kanu stood before them, confused by the tension, Amara looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "Kanu," she began, her voice trembling, "there's something you don't know about your past. Something I've hidden for far too long. I'm your mother." Kanu's confusion turned to shock. "What are you talking about?" Amara took a deep breath. "Years ago, I had a child, a baby boy, but I abandoned him because I was scared and ashamed. I left him at an orphanage with nothing. I never thought I'd see him again. But when I saw the scar on your chest, I knew. You are that boy. You are my son." Kanu stared at her in disbelief. "But my name is Kanu. I've never had a family." Amara's tears fell freely. "Kanu, that was not the name I gave you. I called you something else, a name I've carried with me all these years." Kanu's expression hardened as the weight of the revelation sank in. "You left me," he said, his voice cold. "And my name isn't even mine?" Kanu's world shattered in an instant. The woman who had been cold and distant towards him, the woman he had worked for, was his mom? The mother who had abandoned him as a helpless infant, anger surged through him, and with it, a sense of betrayal. "How could you?" he demanded, his voice shaking with emotion. "You left me. You let me suffer all those years while you lived here in luxury." Amara broke down in tears. "I was young. I was scared. I didn't know how to care for you, and every day since I've regretted it. I know I've hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me." Kanu stared at her, his heart torn between rage and the burning desire for a family he had longed for all his life. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said coldly, turning away. "You left me when I needed you the most." Obasi was also deeply affected by the revelation. He had grown to admire Kanu for his hard work and integrity, but now, knowing the truth, he was conflicted. Kanu was the child of another man, a secret that had been hidden from him all these years. Initially, Obasi considered sending Kanu away, unable to face the emotional complexity of the situation. But as the days passed, Obasi couldn't deny that Kanu had earned his respect. He was strong and capable, and he had proven himself time and time again. Eventually, Obasi realized that Kanu deserved more than just to be a servant. He deserved a place in the family. Even after the truth came out, the tension in the household was thick. Kanu kept his distance from Amara, grappling with his feeling of betrayal. He spent his entire life searching for family, only to discover that the mother he longed for had abandoned him. The anger he felt was overwhelming, and he wasn't sure he could ever let it go. Amara, for her part, gave Kanu the space he needed, knowing she could not force forgiveness. Her health, already fragile, began to deteriorate under the weight of her guilt. She grew weaker day by day, watching from a distance as Kanu struggled with his emotions. One evening, Obasi approached Kanu as he walked in the garden. "Kanu," he began, his voice softer than usual, "I know you are angry, and you have every right to be. But I want you to know that despite everything, you've proven yourself to be a strong and honorable man. Whether you choose to forgive Amara or not, I want you to stay here. I want you to be part of this family." Kanu paused, his heart heavy. He respected Obasi, and the offer stirred something in him, a chance to belong. But he still struggled with the pain of the past, and he didn't know how he could accept the offer without reconciling with Amara. As Amara's health worsened, Kanu found himself sitting in her room more frequently, though their interactions were strained. Over time, he saw the toll her guilt had taken on her. She had made a terrible mistake, but Kanu could see the remorse in her eyes. Slowly, he allowed himself to soften, realizing that holding on to anger would only prolong both their suffering. As Amara lay weak in her bed, Kanu sat beside her. "I've been angry for a long time," he said quietly. "I don't know if I'll ever understand why you did what you did, but I know that holding on to the anger isn't helping either of us." Amara's eyes filled with tears once again, but she remained silent, letting Kanu speak. "I may never be able to forget what happened," he continued, "but I can try to forgive." Amara reached for his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said. "That's all I've ever wanted." If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for more African folk tales. Until next time.